Poland. I am the president of the UN Association of the National Capital Area, one of the largest and most active chapters in UNA USA, serving members in DC, Maryland, and Virginia through educational programs and advocacy for a strong US-UN partnership. UNANCA is honored to partner once again with the Rumi Forum for tonight's panel discussion. The Rumi Forum's mission is to foster intercultural dialogue, stimulate thinking and exchange of opinions on supporting and fostering democracy and peace, and to provide a common platform for education and information exchange. We hope that you will visit our respective websites and learn more about ways to get engaged and make a difference in your communities. September 5th marked the International Day of Charity. This year's theme is Global Solidarity to Eradicate Poverty. Charity, like the notions of voluntarism and philanthropy, provides real social bonding and contributes to the creation of inclusive and more resilient societies. Charity can alleviate the worst effects of humanitarian crisis, supplement public services in health, education, housing, and child protection. It assists the advancement of culture, science, sports, and the protection of cultural and natural heritage. It also promotes the rights of the marginalized and unprivileged and spreads the message of humanity in conflict situations. In the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development, adopted in September 2015, the United Nations recognizes that eradicating poverty in all of its forms and dimensions, including extreme poverty, is the greatest global challenge and is indispensable requirement for sustainable development. The agenda also calls for a spirit of strengthened global solidarity, focused in particularly on the needs of the poorest and most vulnerable. It also acknowledges the roles of the diverse private sector, ranging from micro enterprises to cooperatives to multinationals, and that of civil society organizations and philanthropic organizations in the implementation of the new agenda. There is no question that COVID-19 has exacerbated the challenges of extreme poverty and inequality around the world and at home. However, as many of you have probably witnessed and comes with much hope, the pandemic has also brought communities and sectors together in ways that we haven't seen it before, through empathy and compassion. It is now my pleasure to introduce Stephen Mosley, Board Chair of UNANCA, who has spent decades in the field of international development and education. Steve will serve as our moderator tonight and introduce our distinguished panelist. Thank you. Steve.
Thank you, Paula, very much. And thank you, Rumi Forum. We're so delighted to be able to collaborate with you, and the bringing together of this auspicious set of panelists is very well chosen and allows us to link together three different sectors concerned with charity, giving, compassion, and opportunity for development in our community and around the world. My job this evening is to introduce to you those panelists very briefly, and then to try to keep time scores, if you will, to allow everybody to participate. We're going to organize this with 8 to 10 minutes of opening comments about their experiences in the crisis today with respect to charity. And then we'll follow that by a follow-up question for each of them to talk for a couple of more minutes. Then we're going to move into a Q&A period as well, based on your comments through the chat box. So please do look at that, and please do submit your comments and or questions, really questions if you will. And they're going to be compiled and handed to me in some order, I expect, so that we'll have time for 10 to 15 minutes of questions from you with the audience participation. That's very important. Then we're going to end by a further comment from each of the panelists for just a second, and then turn it back over to the Executive Director of Rumi to give you some further words and thanks. So let me just proceed now with the three introductions of the three people and the themes they're going to talk about in each case. The first is Catherine Marshall, who is a well-known academic specialist and senior fellow at Georgetown's Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs. It's part of the Georgetown University's Walsh School for International Affairs. So she's very much part of our community. But she also heads a nonprofit within the university structure called World Face Development Dialogue. And she's actively engaged with really all leaders of the world, both developed and developing countries, in looking at these critical relationships between religion, development, and prosperity. It's not surprising she's doing that. She spent 40 years at the World Bank, almost 5 decades, dealing and addressing these same issues within the context of the World Bank's programs on every continent on Earth. So we're very pleased that Catherine's joining us. It's going to lead this off. She holds degrees from Wellesley and Princeton, and is very active in our community and in the leadership here on these issues. Jerome Tennille is the manager at JW Marriott International for social impact and volunteerism. He's been there for the past 3.5 years, helping to lead their extraordinary commitment to a 360-degree investment in all aspects of social change, social impact, and volunteerism. He's been at the heart of that. And Marriott has if you don't know, has a long track record, I hope he'll expound on that, of social change, influence, volunteerism, contributions. Its headquarters is in the Washington area, but of course it's one of the largest international hospitality institutions in the world today, operating in I don't know how many countries, but my guess is it's over 75 or 80. So again, Jerome has a long background in staff development and leadership on these issues of volunteerism and charitable undertakings by major corporations, and he heads also his own corporate entity to provide assistance to those of you who might be interested in engaging with him. So welcome. He describes himself as an architect for social good. I love that term, and I hope we're all in the audience and here architects for social good. The third panelist is Kim Ford. She's the president of Martha's Table in Washington here, the Washington area, and where she became president just about a year ago, I think about 15 months ago. And we're so pleased that she's leading this major, well-known institution. It's a multidisciplinary institution. She can expand on that. Sometimes people think of food. Well, it's about food and food for people, families, and for people on the streets. But it's also a child care center. It's an early childhood development center. It's a leader in nutrition and good health. It goes on and on and on, and they have a new headquarters, which she moved into about a year ago. So I'm really pleased that she's with us tonight. So that brings a balance from global to local and the huge range of corporate charitable interests that address all of these things locally and globally. So thank you all very much. Each of them and I'm going to introduce them and have them proceed with that theme one by one in that order. Catherine Marshall's theme this evening is how to balance the good and less good in approaches based on charity versus right. Not that they're opposed to each other, but it's a delicate balancing act. And Catherine, let me call on you.
Good. Well, good evening. Pleasure to be here and to see you all. I think we have to start with the extraordinary moment that we're living, a crisis that really we'll be telling, or someone will be telling our great-grandchildren about, and remembering the different moments and the ways that it affected each one of us, as well as each community. We, sitting at the Berkeley Center in WFDD, very early on, just sort of the day that Georgetown decided to shut its doors, launched a project to try to follow what was happening with religious communities in this COVID pandemic. And we sent out an email every day for over 100 days, and we've now shifted to weekly. We've collected any information we can get in any form, whether it's newspaper, video, photographs, artistic, etc. Basically really thinking about how particularly have religious communities responded to this crisis. And of course, that is in part about charity. So I'm going to start with a couple of comments about that and then go to the broader topic of charity versus rights. So what we've seen, and I think we'll never know in great detail, but we are seeing a remarkable, probably unprecedented global response to the needs that have been unveiled unmasked by the COVID crisis. Charitable giving seems to be up. Volunteerism is a problem because people often are in shutdown situations. But these stories that are coming from Thailand, Malawi, Russia, from every corner of the world, of the ways in which communities are dealing with what Paula described, which is the acute, terrible inequalities that this crisis has exposed, and the vulnerabilities of so many people. So we don't know, we don't have the data, we have scraps of studies, but in general, what it's showing is a remarkable outpouring, the best of humanity. We also know that pandemics tend to bring out some of the worst angels in humanity, and conflict and scapegoating, discrimination, and we are seeing that as well. But for the moment, let's focus on the positive, which is the caring, compassion, the sense of common destiny that everyone, as people say sometimes, is in the same storm, even if we're in very different kinds of boats. So to come to the sort of theoretical issue, charity is vital. It's about caring, it's about compassion. But it's interesting that looking historically at charity, it was often seen as more for the benefit of the giver than for the receiver, partly because poverty was seen as inevitable. The poor shall always be with us. So charity from the beginning had this complex two-way relationship. And even in the 12th century, the Jewish philosopher Maimonides looked at charity in a 12-rung ladder that went all the way from grudging too little to the kind of charity we'd like to see, which is no one knows who's giving. It's very generous, but it's also helping the person that you're working with to achieve self-reliance. So I think that this balance within charity, the importance of charity, we don't want to lose it. But I think we also, when we think about the challenge that Paula put to us, which is about ending poverty, we have to look at it also in terms of rights. In other words, charity should never be condescending. The dangers of having images of people who are lesser because they're in need. All of those dangers are ones that a rights-based approach, a human rights-based approach to development, even the right to development, are designed to counter. So somehow finding ways to balance these two sides of the caring, the compassion, the voluntary giving, putting yourself in the shoes of someone else, as we need to do every minute during this COVID crisis, of seeing what's essential, what's important, and how are people suffering, and what can we do about it, with a basic sense that is the core of human rights, which is that everyone has an equal right to a decent life, to education, to water, to food. And how do we as a society deal with that? How do we change the basic parameters of our society, the structures, so our health system serves everyone, our education serves people equally, and so that everyone has a chance to develop, to flourish, and to develop their own capabilities. Those are the basic objectives that need to bring the charitable impulse and the charitable habit, the charitable institutions together with the framework of sustainable development. So I'll stop there.
The international business framework in which those same tenets are being applied in very creative ways. So I'm going to turn to Jerome and ask you to talk about some of that background and the progress and the journey which you have led in a number of organizations, and including particularly J.W. Marriott's wonderful institution. Thank you. Jerome?
Absolutely, and thank you so much, Stephen. So I guess where I'll start is talking a little bit about the company, how we were founded, and some of our core values, because I think it's incredibly important to how we make our decisions as a company and who we serve and how we do that. And then I'll sort of open up that a little bit more broadly about our current state of business. As most people know, the hospitality and travel industry has been greatly impacted by this, and that in a strange way is also creating a different type of challenge for us in a way that's forcing us to reimagine corporate responsibility as we have traditionally known it. And then I'll just talk also about the shift that I'm also seeing within corporate responsibility at large, with both companies who have been both financially hit hard by this, but also those who have also prospered through just the type of business or industry that they operate in. And so just sort of starting off, Marriott International, we were founded in 1927, and we were founded on the core values of putting people first, serving our world, embracing change, acting with integrity, and also pursuing excellence. And it was with those values that that we still operate and support the communities where we do business. And to talk about the scope of our operations, here in the DC area, we have our headquarters, and we have about, I would say, 5,000 headquarters employees that are here in the DC area, but we also have over 130 hotel properties that represent 30 plus brands, to put it in perspective. Globally, when we think about our presence and how we're supporting communities abroad, we're in 131 countries and territories, and that makes up a workforce of about 700,000 plus associates that wear the Marriott name badge. And that, spreads across about 7,400 hotel properties that are doing that work in their very unique local communities all across the globe. But coming up to present date now, as you know, the hospitality industry has been financially hit incredibly hard. And even though we have traditionally supported areas of poverty, homelessness, and food insecurity, while we are still trying to maintain that operation and how we're serving the communities in this great time of need, we've also had to expand, in a sense, how we're thinking about being a responsible business. And so to put in perspective, while we are still supporting local communities that work in homelessness, poverty, and food insecurity, we've also had to, in a sense, broaden the definition of how we're operating responsibly. A part of that is, at the onset of the pandemic, as we were furloughing tens of thousands of employees here in the United States, me being one of them, I've been furloughed for about 5 months now. The company has still had a responsibility to the communities that we serve, but also expanding that responsibility to even our customers. In this time of need, reassuring our customers who choose to stay on a Marriott property, we have to make sure that they have confidence in our ability to keep them safe and to keep them healthy while they're staying on our property. And then in addition to that, we have the sort of exacerbated challenges that we've had for 400 plus years now, and that's racial injustice. And so since the death of George Floyd, that has only really shaped some of the direction that we're headed now, to deepen the relationships with the organizations that we support in diversity, equity, inclusion, and racial justice. Some of those organizations being the NAACP and the National Urban League. And so while we're navigating some of that, the other responsibility that we've had to really broaden this out to is, how are we supporting our employees through this? We've had tens of thousands of employees that, in some instances, I suspect, are now being put in a position to use those social support networks with some of our community partners here in the DC area, right? And so there is a responsibility that we have as a company to manage that gracefully with empathy, understanding that the more people that stay on furlough or are unfortunately, find themselves laid off or without a position, that only continues to exacerbate the problem that a lot of our local partners are trying to solve. And so for us, we've had to really reimagine the way that we're supporting the communities, taking almost a different approach. And that's just really stretched us a little bit more in terms of, how do we apply that community-centered lens or that human-centered lens on the communities, on our customers, and also our employees. They're sometimes now one and the same person. And what we're also seeing now is that companies like Marriott International that have been financially hit by COVID-19, they're all trying to navigate, industry-wide, in corporate responsibility, they're all trying to navigate a similar situation. But what we've also seen on the other side is there are some companies who have prospered just because of the industry or the sector that they work. And those companies have they've been able to lean in a little bit more with a lot of these issues that we're seeing. I think as we've all seen, natural and man-made disasters, they do two different things, right? They exacerbate the issues that have been underlying for years. And I think for a lot of companies, this has been sort of a reckoning where they have been able to identify that and be able to come to grips with that more in a more authentic manner to really address that human need. The other thing too that I would mention is I think natural man-made disasters also have a tendency to accelerate some of the things that have already been happening. And I'm going to use two different examples and then pull it back to serving the community. But in my role managing a global volunteer program, I've seen a hyper focus on virtual volunteerism. It is getting the due respect that, in my opinion, it's not received for the 30 years that it's been around. And so in some instance, it's a double-edged sword, right? We're seeing a greater demand for virtual volunteerism, even if it doesn't necessarily meet the demands of society. But it's also elevated virtual volunteerism in a way that I think moving forward, a lot more companies will seek to embrace. The other thing that we've seen accelerate is the delivery, right? Delivery services and remote style, zero contact transfers. This past 4 months, I never knew that I would be having date night with my significant other and ordering food for delivery from Ruth's Chris. That never occurred to me. It said that would be a reality. And that's the reality that we face ourselves. But these are changes that I think have been happening for years, right? Virtual and remote style of work, and also delivery style of engagement. I just don't think that we would have seen that for another 5 to 10 years. But this pandemic has almost forced our hand to do that. And what we're seeing in the charitable giving space and corporate responsibility is that more companies are now accepting that as a viable means of serving their community partners and how they're supporting the communities where they do business. And the last thing that I'll say is, this is a great time of need, and there's a lot of hurt right now. But I think as we get through the end of the year and once we get into 2021, what I'm actually seeing is what I would consider a shift in corporate responsibility or responsible business. And I'll use a couple different examples of this and tie it back. But it was at the onset of the pandemic that we saw breweries and distilleries pivot their operations to make hand sanitizer. We've seen telecommunications companies offer essentially low cost and free internet access as people started to do distance learning with their kids and are still doing that. We have seen apparel companies make a pivot and a shift to making the apparel that they made and now making masks for COVID-19 first responders. And we've also seen the auto industry or auto manufacturers pivot from making cars to making ventilators. And that type of human-centered approach, I've never seen. A lot of people will point back to the to the Defense Production Act. But that was very different for a lot of reasons. And I think this shift that we're seeing within corporate responsibility or responsible business is a shift that we wouldn't have seen for another 10 years if not for COVID-19. And what I feel fairly confident about is that moving into 2021, society's expectations will hold companies accountable to maintaining the bar that they just set over the past 6 months. And, for me, this is, I've been working in the social good space for close to 10 years now. Before that, I served in the military for 7. And the amount of purpose-driven business that I'm seeing now over the past 6 months, to me, is very heartwarming, especially because this is the industry that I work in. And they always say that, this too shall pass, and it will. And I think that once we come out of the other side of it, companies will be better, they will do better. And a part of that will be the expectations that society and their employees and leadership hold their business entities accountable to. And I think that will be a positive driver when we get back to what we could consider normal operations of supporting those in poverty, homelessness, and food insecurity. There are a handful of organizations that we support here from our headquarters and from a lot of our area properties, like Martha's Table and like DC Central Kitchen and Manna Food Center and Capital Area Food Bank. And a lot of these organizations are doing fantastic work. And I think, once we get to a point of normalcy, if we can ever consider it that, there will be a deepening of that type of work in a more authentic manner.
What a wonderful statement on behalf of your host and employer, but also on behalf of the whole industry and seeing that change shifting. I think there's a lot of fruitful opportunity for not only charitable giving in support of NGOs that the corporations have done for years, but the interaction between the academic world, which helps to lead a lot of the thinking in these areas, the corporate world, and indeed the service areas, which have become so much more sophisticated also. So thank you very much for that presentation. Outstanding. Let me turn as well now to my new friend, Kim Ford, whom I've only met recently. I happen to have a long relationship to Martha's Table, but that's before she was there. And I already mentioned that she has an extraordinary background, having served in the Obama administration during the period of recovery after the last depression or recession. So she was at the center of a lot of that at that time. She also has a background in education and stems from the world of community development, the world of education, the world of change through the Department of Education, and was also the dean for outreach and youth development and schools for the University of District of Columbia before she was found by Martha's Table, fortunately, to lead it into this period. I can imagine becoming the new CEO of Martha's Table. I can't imagine becoming the CEO of Martha's Table just a few months before the pandemic. So Kim, share with us your challenges and your opportunities and your enthusiasm, which leads this institution. Thank you so much for being with us.
No, thank you. And thanks so much for your support for the past 40 years. We are Martha's Table, 40 years old, 40 years strong. Want to thank UNA, the Rumi Foundation, and all of the other panelists and those who are watching. So the great Martha's Table, as I mentioned, we've been around for 40 years. And as Steve mentioned, over those 40 years, we've really evolved. And we've evolved out of what some folks would have initially called a soup kitchen into now our McKenna's Wagon, which is our longest standing program that goes out every single day to provide a hot meal to those who are facing housing instability, no matter weather. Today's not looking so great, no matter holiday, no matter global pandemic, always goes out. We evolved from what folks may have called a food pantry into now healthy markets. We have a healthy market, lobby markets at our educational campuses in Ward 8 and Ward 1. And we also have 53 joyful pop-up markets at every elementary school in Ward 7 and 8. We evolved from what people would call a thrift shop into a boutique, our Outfitters Boutique, where people can shop at no cost for children's clothes and adult workforce attire. And we also evolved from what folks would have called a daycare into nationally accredited early childhood education centers, both again in Southeast and in Northwest. And, you know, we were just rocking and rolling and just living the dream, and then COVID landed on us, right? And my theme is standing with communities in crisis. And our colleague just talked about pivoting. So just 5 days after the first COVID case in DC was announced, we pivoted. We immediately placed our early childhood education centers on hiatus and went to virtual learning. And that's very difficult with young people who are 6 weeks to age 4. But what's also difficult is that we knew our families, and we knew we correctly, although unfortunately, predicted that this was going to hit our families really hard, and it did. And instead of just closing and saying bye, we actually provided a comprehensive package to all of our families. We did direct cash support, $2,250 a month, free and clear, plus $15 a day worth of grocery gift cards, plus diapers, wipes, and formula. And this went on for 4 months. And it ended up being $9,000 in non-conditional cash transfers. And again, the monthly supports in addition to that. And, you know, we have 137 enrolled families, sent out a survey, 100 of those families responded, and just, again, unfortunately, we were correct. Those who were working, over 60% had lost their jobs by that time in the time frame. We know that that number is even higher now. People were making sure that they could stay in their homes, you know, being able to provide money so that folks could, you know, get transportation, because we talk about all these interlocking systems. You know, COVID disrupted the transportation system. So for those who had jobs, they couldn't get to their jobs. So again, we were able to provide those supports. And we talk about a major pivot. That is not anything we had ever done in the past before. It was something that we started with our own money. We just did it because we believed it to be a good thing to do, and we believed it to be a supportive thing to do. The money then came after that, which was great. And I think my board was happy to know that after that started to happen. But again, in times of crisis, it's time to be bold, it's time to be comprehensive, it's time to step up. The other thing we did is we never stopped our food operations. So I mentioned McKenna's Wagon. It has never missed a day. It has never missed a day throughout COVID, and our lobby markets haven't missed a day. The other thing that's really interesting is that when the school systems closed, our Joyful Markets closed, but we did continue to support all of the DCPS meal sites, but there was significant need in the community. So while other organizations were contracting and closing, we actually expanded. We added 10 additional community pop-ups out in the community because, again, the need had spiked so drastically. People were coming in droves. And as the pandemic has gone on and continues to go on, the need goes up because, as a colleague just mentioned, you know, folks are losing their jobs. They're losing their jobs. They're furloughed. Their hours are getting cut. And so what's first? First is keep the roof over your head. And what's second? I need to be able to feed myself and my family. We've had so many people come to us almost with their heads down saying, you know, I never thought it was going to come to this. And we always say this is not about being in need. That we don't think of Martha's Table like that. We think of ourselves as providing access to healthy food, fruits, vegetables, shelf life items. So, you know, we always treat folks with dignity and respect. Our core values are respect, compassion, teamwork, accountability. And so we have dialogue with our neighbors and our guests who come, and then they leave and they're like, this is great. This is great because it's not, it really is about standing with the community. You know, it's not giving to the community, it's standing with the community. And if the community needs something and you have the resources and supports, you can put those things together. And what we have seen is our food used to be about 500 bags of groceries a day, has gone to 2,000 bags of groceries a day. 2,000 bags of groceries a day. That has sustained now for 4 months, and it does not look like it is going to come down at all. But going back to the part around standing with communities, they're standing with us as well. So many people come to us who say, I don't have any money to give, but they're giving of their time. We actually have a new huge volunteer base of folks who were coming to receive supports who are now giving back, because again, we're standing alongside each other. Just this morning, we had a neighbor who came and was bringing us clothes and said, again, I might not have money, but I have clothes for you for the boutique. And so, I think, again, as our other colleague talked about moving it to rights, when you look at people and you have respect for them and you understand that you're in this together and it is a mutual relationship, you treat people differently, they treat you differently. There's a leverage effect that's involved. And I could go on about this forever, but this is why we're so proud of our evolution over the 40 years. We're very proud of our immediate pivot. We're proud of the fact that we have continued to be able to stand alongside the community, and we're even prouder and more so humble that they're standing alongside us. Steve, I think you're muted. Steve, I think you're muted.
I unmuted him, but still. Okay.
There we go. Okay, I'm unmuted. I'm sorry. Okay, thank you very much. I just want to say, first of all, thank you. All three of you as panelists arrived at your conclusion precisely on schedule. So we're going to have an opportunity to have another round of discussion, and also then time as well for the questions, which I'm sure are beginning to come in from the chat section. A lot of commonality in your outlook and your perspective about rising to the challenge, to be bold, to be innovative, to make a difference, to change your institution, even in the face of the kind of challenges Jerome talked about in terms of the capacity of his own institution. But Catherine, let me start with you and ask you, what are the innovations and changes that you think it will be possible to sustain and actually have a long-term influence? And you're influencing through your institute and for your special dialogue the greatest leaders of the largest countries in the G20, and you're about to have a meeting of them building up from regional meetings. What are the lessons you're going to be discussing with them to sustain after the crisis begins to wane? It will wane to some extent, but the crises and people's conditions are going to remain with us a very long time. What are the innovations you can point to now that you think you're going to be advocating?
Well, that's a good and a tough set of questions. And I think that I think we should be thinking about it and trying to answer it in two parts. Part of it is to make sure that we really are seeing and looking at the immediate problems that we're facing. So we have, for example, the largest number of refugees and internally displaced people that we've had since the end of World War II, close to 80 million, who are suffering. I mean, the stories, the pictures of the fire on Lesbos are horrifying, and the suffering that we're hearing about in refugee communities. The children who have missed school, 1.5, 1.8 billion, problems and stories about domestic violence, abuse of children. There's so many critical issues that need to be squarely on the agenda of the G20 leaders, but also national leaders and local leaders. So we can't only dream about the future. I think we need to be focusing very much on these very real, immediate issues. It's a little disturbing that charitable giving and also government support in the US has been almost entirely domestic, with very, very little going to international. I think it's 58% to 11% are some of the numbers that I've seen. So there are many countries that are suffering in much more painful, much worse even than Kim might imagine. It's a very disturbing reality that this crisis has revealed. But then I think we have the other side of it, and you're hearing more and more people saying that it's not enough to just build back the way things were. Even to build back better sounds a bit marginal. but to really bring the energies that we're seeing, for example, in the Black Lives Matter movement and so many others, to really rethink these issues of structural poverty and the unfairness in the world, so that we're able to look to a better future and deal with the issues on healthcare, having healthcare available to everyone, education available. We have to obviously to rethink jobs. That's become so clear as we understand what is essential and what is not, and what we depend on. So housing, the raft of evictions that apparently are just about to strike. But why is that happening? Why are so many people living from one day to the next? It's not right. It's not decent. It's not the kind of world that we know is possible. We know that's the tragedy today, or the opportunity today, is that this is not, the poor need not always be with us. There are societies that have dealt with it. And in the rebuilding after the COVID pandemic, I think we need to look very aggressively at better solutions.
Thank you. I think that's why we're all here this evening, actually, to think about that and to move us forward, recognizing that we can't not concentrate on the current crisis, but we have to be thinking through and beyond that. And each of us is in a position to do that. Jerome, let me turn to you too, as you must be thinking a lot about this in both your consulting planning, but also having served this firm in such a way that you must be thinking about how you influence the other firms to take lessons forward.
So, when I think about the work that we do traditionally in places of poverty, homelessness, and food insecurity, in a lot of instances, these are our community partners that can't necessarily benefit from virtual volunteer mechanisms to support the communities that they serve. And when I seek to connect with other CSR professionals who generally don't have I would say that the same depth of experience that we have as a company, and what I mean by that is, hotel properties are very much resourced to support poverty and food insecurity, because we have places of lodging for those who have been displaced, and we generally have food on a lot of our properties, and so we're just strangely resourced to really support those areas, or some of, when you talk about Sustainable Development Goal 1 and 2. But, a lot of the CSR communities that I'm connected with, they're hyper-focused on virtual volunteerism, and to almost a degree that I think, unfortunately, it's pushing some organizations beyond their capacity to support their community in the way that community is best served, because it's almost like a tale of, the tail wagging the dog, where some of these community partners that I've seen are having to respond to their corporate donors or their corporate partners who have this employee engagement expectation to create a virtual volunteer opportunity when it doesn't necessarily align with the need of that organization. And so I try to channel that voice for our community partners to say, hey, I understand that you're desperately seeking this employee engagement opportunity, and you're seeking this remote and virtual volunteer opportunity, but it doesn't necessarily support all these communities. And you could be doing some damage by requesting that some of these organizations create these opportunities that don't necessarily support their partners. So I'm trying to be that advocate to share with my colleagues and my peers who work in CSR to say, like, the in-person need is greater than it's probably been within the last 10 years. And I understand that some companies are incredibly risk averse, but we cannot stop the in-person volunteer opportunities, because if we go to Capital Area Food Bank, they're a food warehouse, or Martha's Table, or Manna Food Center, right? Community Food Rescue. These are all organizations that require they require people power to sort and distribute and deliver food. And that's been my my soapbox for the last 5 months, is to essentially not necessarily.
That's a nice transition.
Absolutely.
Thank you. It's an easy transition to see if Kim doesn't have a response
Well, yeah,
to that
absolutely.
in terms of like you, but let me also ask you in your thinking at this segment to talk about how partnerships have changed and begun to develop in the Washington area among organizations like your own or parallel or in some cases different, so that you're sharing some of the needs. I think that's where a lot of innovation seems to be occurring under the crisis. And my question will be, will that continue in the future if the crisis abates? Will it be possible to see a greater outcome because of new kinds of partnerships?
Absolutely. And I'll just hit on three things. One, Jerome, you're absolutely right. Like people power. Okay, you go from 500 bags of groceries to 2,000. That requires a lot more people. That requires a lot more food, which requires a lot more trucks, which requires a lot more loading and unloading and da 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 da. And so the people power is so incredibly needed because there are things that can't be done virtually. What I will also say, secondly, is that the point that was made, 2 points that were made earlier, Jerome, you talked about acceleration, and Catherine, you talked about not building back, not going back and not building back better. What I think this is giving us, it's the strangest moment, but it gives you a very unique time to actually accelerate, right? And Jerome gave some great examples around acceleration, but in our work, it's going to give us the opportunity to accelerate too. We are talking about now, like all of our focus is how do we go from 1 to 5? We're just going to leapfrog the entire middle. We don't have to go through these evolutionary steps of like the evolution of education or the evolution of supply chain and distribution. Like now we can actually focus on the desired outcome and just figure out how to get there, and we can try innovative and new and crazy things, because if not now, when? Right? And it allows you to go out of your day-to-day. So, I talked about we're actually a massive logistical operation, right? That a lot of it has gone on hiatus for now. So instead of every day worried about, the 53 markets that have to happen, we have fewer markets, but it allows us to have that brain space to say, how can we accelerate? How can we get to the desired outcome? How can we be bold? And what we're seeing with the partnerships, third, is that, people want to see bold. If you think about actually economic downturns, it's when a lot of times companies innovate, right? Like in an economic downturn is when Apple starts rolling out all kinds of new stuff, right? Why can't nonprofits do that? And companies and organizations are looking to organizations who are willing, ready, able to do that. And so I mentioned earlier our cash assistance that we did with our families, but what that allowed it to do is it built a foundation that now 3 other nonprofits that operate in this same Southeast location down here in Ward 8, Bread for the City, Building Bridges Across the River, and Far Southeast Family Strengthening Collaborative. Now we've all come together collectively to do a joint cash transfer program. So now that's going to actually touch 500 people. Will this continue after? Yes, I absolutely believe it will, because again, now we had the time to do the things that we couldn't do before. And now we can prove that these types of things work. We have Urban Institute doing an eval on it. It's going to show that it works. That means that we're then going to be able to scale it both here in DC, and we also believe it can be a national model. But I think that, these types of partnerships are going to continue. And even if it's not specific and programmatic nature, what this is showing is just general human nature, right? Crisis will either bring out the best in you or the worst in you. And when the partnerships are formed in this type of moment, when you're in that foxhole with somebody, you're going to continue that, whether it's, again, the specific thing you're doing now or not. So I'm very, very strangely optimistic about the future and about the things that we're going to do, about jumping to the desired outcomes. And that acceleration piece, I think, is just so clear. And again, I'm strangely optimistic about where we're going to go when we get on the back end of this.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think I'm unmuted this time. Thank you for that inspirational encouragement. I see there are quite a number of comments and or questions coming in over the chat box. I'm not sure I have them all, but several of them, I'm not too surprised at this particular point in 2020. Several of them are comments about how national politicians, not only in this country, but around the world, don't seem to be attuned to this lesson about graciousness, about charity, about giving, about sharing. And they don't seem, in many cases, the questions imply, and I happen to have that same view, that they don't seem to have entered into the thoughtfulness of many leaders around the world. Some of them, like in Brazil, I'll just use an example, or down the street, so forth, are absent an understanding of this charitable background and how important it is for all people in crisis to have a uniting. I'm wondering how you as institutions, certainly you, Catherine, and your work are trying to influence that to make this more apparent to national leaders. How are we doing? What's the chance of bringing about some national leadership in places which sorely need it today? I'm trying to stay away from the political action of our election in 2 months, but it's hard to avoid. Could each of you comment a little bit about the political atmosphere within which you're delivering this great capacity?
Well, I am a cockeyed chronic optimist by nature, and I am therefore hopeful that the realities that have been stripped away. I mean, the fact of the inequities, of the vivid examples of how people are suffering, how fragile their lives are, but also, and I think this is one of the messages of this event today, is that so much is possible. You know, they used to say that the possible takes a long time, the impossible takes a little longer. That for many people, for many institutions, things that seem to be totally impossible have suddenly happened, almost within a matter of weeks. So I don't know. I am very hopeful that these realities that everyone has lived, and the fact that everyone lives them so differently, will help to change the minds. But it also depends on the constituencies, on making the case in a clear, compelling way, both for the need, but I think this comes back to our charity and rights, but also to the simple justice, there, but for the grace of God go I. We could, any of us, be in these situations, and many people have been. So I think it is a question of really working together to convey those messages through political processes. That's the only option we've got.
Thank you. We also recognize that the UN and our main purpose is actually to enable people throughout this area and across the country to understand that we're in this together internationally and locally, and to recognize that the Sustainable Development Goals, which have been laid out and adopted by all countries, which really address these on an integrated basis, is a perfect opportunity to frame our lessons from the COVID crisis and our work with people at a people level to try to influence structural change and policies going forward. That's the heart of some of the other questions that were raised as well. We have time for just maybe one other comment from each of the other panelists before I ask you to make one final comment of 1 minute each after that. And that is to ask Jerome, in your situation, several of the people in the audience have wondered, what has the company, that is JW Marriott, been able to do to serve its people who are so also affected? They've become the clients, if you will, and the clients have become the people. And you didn't mention that, but I'm sure, I can't imagine that the company hasn't also done quite a bit of innovative work with those people who are furloughed as you are, or others. And a number of our audience, a number of members in the audience would like to hear something said about that.
Yeah, so Marriott International, I would say at the onset of the pandemic, there are four areas that we really tried to lean in as a company. Of course, trying to provide, we worked with a lot of partners, several dozen partners that we support who are major vendors to find and create a portal where our employees could find part-time work or full-time work to make a transition to another industry if they so chose to do that. And so that's been a program that's been in place for close to 5 months now for employees who wanted to find work or to find a new opportunity. The second area where we leaned in was certainly financial health and financial literacy type of training. So we have an active portal where over this time of great hardship, employees have been able to find resources and training that would help them manage their personal financial circumstance that they find themselves in through this time. The third area where we leaned in was certainly mental health and trying to promote health and wellness. Emotional hardship. And the fourth area is, as a company, we're incredibly decentralized. So to put it in perspective, we have 5,500 hotel properties here within the United States specifically. And many of the hotel properties have their own unique partnerships and relationships that are unique to their region, state, or their county. And what we've seen is that there are a lot of properties that work directly with the partners that they supported in their community to get the support needed for those who found themselves furloughed or laid off through harsh economic times.
Thank you. I've unmuted myself if that was allowed. Thank you very much. And Kim, I think we're down to really just 30 seconds before I'm going to turn this back over to the executive director of RUMI to say a little bit more about RUMI and to expand on this. So I haven't covered all of the questions. I apologize, but I would like you, Kim, to have the last word, if you will, as a panelist. And you might want to speak to the audience and let them know how not only Martha's Table, but how do other institutions in town with which you're partnered can take advantage of the interests and the willingness to receive support, both personally and in other ways, financially included, from people who are in the audience. Could you say something about that?
Sure, absolutely. Please feel free to support any of the wonderful organizations in the District of Columbia, but also feel free to support Martha's Table, 40 years old, 40 years strong, www.marthastable.org. And I would just say finally that there are a lot of ways to give both to us and to others, whether it's making sandwiches, donating clothes, donating your time, donating your money. And I would just close by saying, remember to come at this work with dignity and respect and compassion, and to remember you're not doing something to or for someone, you're doing it with them. Martha's Table for the win.
Thank you. And all of these institutions and the great leadership that you all, three of you, represented this evening. It's a wonderful catalog of interest, capacity, great leadership, and the ability to pivot, which I think will help lead all of our charitable organizations forward, and the knowledge of charity, which I think is so important to value and to assess. And I didn't mention that there are quite a number of recent books by Catherine that help to address this. I think everybody in the audience would be interested. So go to her website at the Berkeley Center at Georgetown University and look at some of the recent forums and some of her earlier findings that are very much in line with the kind of discussion we had this evening. Let me just say again, it's been a delight for the Nations Association of the National Capital Area to collaborate with RUMI. It's a wonderful program. It's a wonderful ongoing series of activities, and we're looking forward to finding other opportunities to collaborate and work together. Thank you to the audience, and I'm going to turn it over to Ibrahim and Lee to take us home for the evening. Thank you very much again. Ibrahim.
Stephen, thank you very much for leading us through the last 1 hour, which featured such a spectrum of speakers and issues. Let me begin with a note on RUMI Forum, which has been around since 1999 as a DC-based, DC area institution committed to promoting coexistence through interfaith dialogue and intercultural understanding. Rumi Forum has several tracks of programs, one being an ongoing webinar and panel series, including this one, and which in a surprising manner has been even more frequent during the pandemic times. We also try to bring communities together in an effort to promote religious literacy, and that's directly congregation to congregation, people to people exchanges, in addition to those educational webinars that we are trying to organize as an ongoing project soon to be announced formally. Rumi Forum is working with the Interfaith Council of Metropolitan Washington, Catholic University, and Washington Theological Consortium to announce the first round of Interfaith Leadership Forum, which will be a mutual training, mutual learning program for all those interested professionals, including the clergy, but not limited to, all those interested professionals who want to advance their interfaith credentials and exchange ideas about interfaith engagement. So we have covered such a rich variety of angles, including stakeholders, issues, solutions, not to mention the challenges that we are facing. So it looks like there is a whole new vision, and it all comes as a package. That difficulties, extraordinary times leading to better learning, as Kim put it. So we have learned about and we have heard a lot of reasons and very real developments, ongoing programs and efforts that this will be over sooner or later, and what will remain with us may be leading a hybrid world, not like the one before maybe, but what's gonna stay with us is most likely and most hopefully is the best part of this experience. So I thank all the speakers for highlighting this. And I thank once again, Stephen, for your leadership. Wish everyone a great evening and best of health. Look forward to meeting you in future programs, including those with United Nations Association of the National Capital Area, which we are always happy to collaborate with. Thank you very much. Stay safe. Bye.